I told you I'm not good in the evenings. Unless I'm at Electric Dreams.
I'm going to have Marco start making the races later and later and later.
Welcome back, guys. It's episode 4. We got a banger episode for you tonight. If I can get through it in one take, it'll be a great episode. I can't thank you guys enough for all the likes and subscribes and all the comments. This has been an absolutely incredible journey so far. Today we got our question, we got a reader question, we got Todd's 2-minute tech tip, and we're giving away a ScaleAuto GT3 car. Let's get into it.
Victory's calling, it's racing time. The spinning pinion takes the crown. Fast and furious, round and round.
Oh God.
Rush, the speed's dominion. Welcome to the world of the spinning pinion.
All right, guys, welcome back. My name is Ian Douglas.
I'm Todd Ulery.
And this is the Spinning Pinion Podcast, episode 4. Today, we have a question, which is our question. Our question is, Todd?
How is torque killing your race?
That is a great question. So we are going to set a timer for 10 minutes, starting now. And we're going to talk about this. Do you have any input on how torque is affecting these cars? Like, give us a little background about your perspective on torque and 132nd scale cars.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. My first, I'll go through my first 3 classes I raced as a slot car racer. It was NSR, well, it was Can-Am, so it was an NSR Shark motor.
Okay.
Slotted Group C, which is and then GT, which was an NSR.
Bam,
King.
torque.
Yeah. And the slotted motors have a little bit more punch than the NSRs because it's a 23K and it's got a little bit more torque. And so it was just kind of like step, boom.
Yeah.
Where you step into the long cans and it's just tons and tons of torque. And I mean, I remember thinking that as I was, driving those cars, like, holy cow, this actually feels a lot different. It's just like you could press the trigger and kick the rear end loose. And that's, I think, where, for how small these cars are, throwing that much torque at them is kind of nuts when you really think about it.
Yeah.
When you think about the motors they use on the big cars, right? And 124, especially like in retro, right? And then look at the motors that we use in 132. It's like, that seems backwards a little bit.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. You got 900 or 800 wide foam tires, or you got, these teeny weeny little rubber tires with the contact patch the size of
350 grams of torque at those things,
Yeah, perfect. What could go wrong? This is so much fun for everyone.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I've got my theories on like where that came from, right? We've talked about this a little bit, where I think because the long can motors have bigger magnets, the magnetic effect you get from them is a lot more. And I think that plays a big part in why that became popularized. But, as we shift to tuning for, well, at least me anyway, tuning more for non-magnetic braid, you have driven on non-magnetic braid at Motown quite a bit.
I was going to say, I don't run magnet. We don't have any magnetic tracks.
You've driven like flat out regular, not magna braid quite a bit more than I have.
Got it.
So my point being, like, as that's kind of coming into our whatever tuning repertoire for me anyway, it puts a bigger emphasis on that. Right now, we're not getting that advantage of a long can, and we already were dialing it out, but even more so now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's to kind of pull it back to how torque is killing your race. Obviously we are establishing that those motors have crazy torque. And my thought is that it probably comes from like Ninko tracks, right? Where you have like really aggressive downforce and you squeeze it and it generates some immediate grip, right? But now with these 200, 300 gram torque motors, you squeeze a trigger and that car is doing some wild stuff. So like when you're at the track and you see people driving these cars, what are some of the things that you see when they're driving high torque cars that people might not realize is actually the torque?
I think the biggest thing, right, is like on corner exit, they're getting on it too soon, and that in and of itself is not always bad when you don't have a lot of torque, right? But when you have a ton of torque and you're getting on it too soon, it's not really different from a real car, right? If you
Yeah.
get on it too soon with a ton of torque in a real car, you're going to be sideways and pretty quickly. And it's the same thing with slot cars. And you'll see the tail end kicking out, or with certain cars that are more prone to like chattering, right? You'll see a ton of chattering
Oh, yeah.
because there are certain cars that just need to be straight before you really hit the throttle. And when you put a lot of torque in a car like that, it's just like you can see it, you can hear it.
Yeah.
You don't even need to be looking at the track. You can hear it because it's just like, you know, chattering like crazy. But that's the biggest thing, right? It's when you're applying the power. It's not so much like when you're down the straight, you know, it's not, well, yeah, some of them may have more brake, although I don't know that that's totally the case. The NSR King doesn't quite have as much brake as like some other long cans. But yeah, I don't know that it's really just like corner
Yeah.
exit, maybe mid corner through some technical sections, but it's power delivery, right? And
Hmm.
it forces you even more so when you're driving a high torque motor. You know, you may not have a choice, right? You may not have a choice of what motor you get to pick. A lot of our classes, it's a spec motor. And so you just kind of need to deal with what you've got. And that's where the controller comes into play, a lot of it. And one of the other things is like gearing, right? You can gear to handle a torque. You know, you and I were talking about this just a couple days ago with your ScaleAuto hypercar, and kind of gearing that down to take some of the torque out of that motor. Has like a monster amount of torque
Yeah.
that comes in those cars, like 430 grams, which is insane because the car weighs like 90. And
Yes.
yeah. So, I mean, you've got like a longer, more diverse background in slot cars. Like, is this something you thought of in 24 scale at all? And
No.
when did you really like start, you know, considering how much that was impacting your car as you were starting to get into your like kind of 132 journey?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of aligns with the different controllers that I was using. So, at first I started out with the DeFalco, everyone's first controller back. And then from there, I wanted something that was a little bit more. I was racing HO at the time, so I bought a Medanic controller, which is like a really, really nice wiperless controller. It just has a potentiometer, so it's ultra smooth. And then I used that at the 2022 slotted Nats, and we were running F1 tires on the slotted Group C cars, so we didn't really have to worry about torque. And then from there, I got Herman back into the hobby, and he was like, "You should really try this Third Eye Eclipse." And so the thing that the Third Eye had was it had a choke, and so as soon as we started using the choke, the lap times would just drop. And I remember being at the track and trying the Medanic, the DeFalco, and the Third Eye. And as soon as I went to the Third Eye, it was a tenth faster. Like there was no difference in, the car. I was just literally changing the plugs to the new controller. And that is kind of what started my journey. And there were quite a few races at Electric Dreams where we ran like insane gear ratios, like ScaleAuto 2023, where I ran a 1426.
Yeah.
And I ran 60 feet of choke the whole race, and it was still too much. And, I think over the years here, I've been working with you on this stuff and finding that sweet spot. It's funny because at the beginning I didn't want to use choke. I didn't want to use weight. I didn't want to under gear, but now I'm sort of realizing that adding weight, gearing down, kind of using the acceleration control on our controllers, it like just makes the car so much easier to drive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one of the things that it gets tough when you give advice on these things, right? Because it sounds like, you want to say, everyone wants to distill it down to one tip of, always gear down a motor and always do, but you really have to consider what you're working with and what you need to take advantage of. Case in point, the motors that we used for MR slot car, right? 20K flat six from Slotted is a motor that doesn't have a lot of RPM, but it has a decent amount of torque compared to like a short can. And in that situation, because we were also somewhat gear limited between what we could run, like you needed to take advantage of the torque and gear it tall to get the speed out of the car.
Yeah.
Whereas you've got something like ScaleAuto or, yeah, I mean, that's probably the best. That's the only big race that we race a long can in. You've got torque for days in that motor, and you're trying to dial everything out of it that you can, because those motors are super punched. It's a great motor. I love it, but it's going to take whatever you give it and it's going to go because it's got the torque. It's got way more torque than you need to push that gear. And so a car like that, we might run a shorter gear ratio because you don't want the car to just grab that gear and leverage it and just go, it gets hard to control, and there's a balance there. But, you've got to consider what you're working with. The type of the car, the motor, and the torque, like it's all plays a role into that. We're already at 10 minutes.
Oh man, I don't even know how to stop it.
That's a terrible.
I got it.
Terrible.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Go with it.
Are we cutting? I think we should keep rolling with this a little bit.
Sure. What do you want to add?
Well, I just find it interesting, like you describing your journey through controllers and races, and me being at those races and having raced with you at those races when I was just a nobody. Your results from one to the next, when you went from, the Medanic that didn't have a choke to Christmas Enduro 2022, where you're racing a third eye with a choke, and suddenly, that was your guys' first win there.
Yeah.
And then you came back for ScaleAuto 2023 and just destroyed the field. And yeah, I mean, you were pretty far ahead of time-wise, but that's another thing we'll get into later, right? Is why was your car so hard to drive at that race? And it wasn't because of the torque, right?
That's correct.
So it's interesting hearing that journey, and really it's a journey of you dialing out torque.
Yes, it is. It's 100% related to torque.
How that's making you faster. So I think for a lot of people, they may not realize that that's a thing they need to control. You can get stuck in this mindset of like, there's nothing I can do about this, but there are a lot of things you can do about it, right? So one of them is just not gearing the car so tall, working your way down on the gearing. If your controller has the controls to be able to do it, right? A choke is great. Traction control or acceleration control is also really great. Sensitivity can be really helpful, and not just like really hitting that motor hard from the first band. All of those things will help you to have a more consistent race and not be as mistake prone. And the more confident you can get while you're driving and while you're racing, the easier time you're going to have sneaking up to that line, riding that line of where you need to be the whole race, and being able to push. Because if you've got a car set up that you just can't, that's high torque, and you don't have confidence in, you're not gonna have an enjoyable race. B, you're probably gonna end up coming off a whole bunch, and you're gonna leave frustrated. And I think, look at Mr. Ian Douglas, who through cutting out torque started winning major races.
Well, I was gonna leave everybody with kind of like a weird analogy. One of the reasons that we like this controller, and yes, there is a trigger on the other side of it, it's just off. I'm not driving with the knobs. Todd probably does that in his sleep.
Marco likes to say that my controller gets HBO.
Max or just regular HBO?
All of them. Gets everything.
Okay.
All the streaming channels, Netflix, Hulu. Not Paramount Plus. I don't know why.
Oh, well, we got to watch Star Trek. So if we look at this controller, one of the really cool things about this controller is that it has this whole entire brake complex, right? Which allows you to control the way in which the brakes ease you into the corner. And a lot of people, it's really obvious to them, yeah, that's really helpful. Acceleration and traction control is just the opposite end of that, where you're easing into the corner, but then you're also easing out of the corner. And both play a super critical role. When I had the third eye, we only had the acceleration end of it, right, with the choke. And then once I unlocked this guy and figured some of this stuff out, I say some because I still don't know it as well as you do. But once I started
figuring the wrong side of the controller, so that's your first problem.
Isn't it right here?
No, that's start speed.
This is start speed?
Yep.
That's why that's been happening. It's all right. Yes, the braking. It's all reversed in the camera. So The braking, thank you. Anyways, I'm just trying to point out that acceleration control is just the other end of braking, and you need both to maximize it. Once I did that, it opened up a whole nother avenue for me to find time.
And I regret convincing you to buy that controller every day.
We're going to lose all of our subs on this episode alone. I'm just really thankful that we have this ScaleAuto car to give away. Do you want to give this away?
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to share my screen right now. Let's see here. All right, so we got the randomizer here. We are going to hit start, and it's going to start going, and it's going to take forever because I really wanted to build the suspense. Let's see who wins. Who is it? Sweet, it's Dennis!
Dennis Brown, all right.
Dennis Brown. I loved Dennis's comment. That's awesome. Let's see. Let's see if I can scroll through real quick. I think it was towards the top here. Let's see. All right, so Dennis says, an incredible show. Addressing the subject of different classes or levels of racers is critical to the growth of the sport. For many of the racers at the big events, they spend a lot of time and money getting ready to be done by 10 a.m. Sunday with no acknowledgement of their efforts. RC Box Stock is a great example of standardized regulations that you can easily follow and advance at your own pace or ability. Thanks for a much needed platform for our sport and community. Dennis, thank you so much. I'm super happy that you ended up getting this car. Please email us at thespinningpinion@gmail.com and we will ship that out for you. So that's our first giveaway. We plan to do more giveaways. I don't know what's in store, whether it's cars or maybe Todd is going to paint you a concourse winning body.
Yeah, we could do that. Maybe.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here.
Damn it.
It's legally binding. Okay, so let's do Todd's 2-minute tech tip. So, what did you bring today, and what are we talking about?
Today, we're talking about how do you determine what size your tires need to be to meet clearance? This is a question I get asked all the time at the track. What size do my tires need to be, and how do I figure that out? And the answer is actually really pretty simple.
You text Braden.
You need one pretty cheap and easy tool, or you text Braden. Yeah, sure. Maybe that's what you do.
It is.
And that's feeler gauges. I love these plastic feeler gauges because the motors on slot cars are magnetic and the metal ones, the steel ones will stick to the motor. So a feeler gauge. And the easiest way to do this is to put either previous set of tires. Generally, that's the easiest way to do it is a set of tires from another car. Or you can use the tires that it came with or the tires before you use them. Either you just get them round first, like just start truing them until they're just round before you start doing size. Measure the tire, put it on there, put it on the car, put it on a tech block, and then you're going to start using these feeler gauges to figure out what the clearance is with those tires at that known size. Let's say you're shooting for a 0.8 millimeter clearance, which is a lot of the classes at Electric Dreams, and your car's at, I don't know, 1.2 millimeters, let's just say, off the block. Your clearance is a function of the radius of the tire, not the diameter. So you've got to double that difference to figure out how much you need to take off of the diameter of the tire. So if your tire is at 19 millimeters and you're at 1.2 millimeters clearance, you're going to take 1.2 minus the 0.8 you want to end up at. That's 0.4. Double that. That's 0.8. You need to take 0.8 millimeters off of a 19 millimeter tire, which is 18.2. And that's how you get to the tire size that you need to be right at clearance. There are obviously other considerations in there. You kind of usually want to leave yourself a little bit of wiggle room and think about what you're going to be doing to that tire after you true it, right? Are you going to be polishing it with lighter fluid, which takes off a little bit? But that's the easy way to figure out ballpark where you need to be. And I think that'll help a lot of people in getting, to a good starting point with your set of race tires and getting your car as, low down to the track as possible without overshooting it.
Okay, and so today we have a reader's question from Lance Gallagher, 1712. The question is, What makes a certain car work better than another? For example, at Electric Dreams in Group C, why is it that a Nissan or Mazda work better than a Porsche, Toyota Lancia? What's your take on that?
I think some of that ends up just being, people see what the fast guys happen to be running, and that kind of ends up becoming the car to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
We might pick one over another because it's just a little bit better or it's more consistent. It may not even be the fastest one. It's just the way that it handles at its limit is a little bit better. So it's a more raceable car. There could be all sorts of reasons why we choose one over the other. But there is definitely that, element of people kind of seeing what the fast guys are running, and then they all just kind of gravitate towards that. And so I think especially last year, that's why really the Nissan still was super popular, even after the minimum body weight thing got implemented, because it's just, we had that car dialed in and it's what we still ran, even though I think there could have been faster options out there. But I think as far as what I look for in a car, when I'm like looking at, a lot of cars, and Group C is really great at this because Maurizio's got like all the geometry stuff on their website, and you can really kind of like look at all of that and figure out, okay, what's a good candidate for a car. And for me, I'm looking at something that has, a relatively long guide lead, depending on the class. There are cars that I think that get to be a little bit too long. And that's kind of like finding that balance a little bit, but generally something that has a longer guide lead has a good wide track width. And one of the more important things though is that it has a really light body weight, and particularly for the Nissan, I think that's the big thing. If you know the slot Group C cars, that's the big thing for the Nissan, is that it has a much lighter body than a lot of the other ones. But even when we did have to hit a minimum body weight with the cars this last year, it was still a really great car. So that's not everything. Some other little things, right? How does the body sit on the chassis? So for Group C, that's a big thing. You've got some that sit up on top of the chassis, and some where the chassis kind of nests into the body. And really it's like, is the body being supported on the outsides? For me, that's a big thing. And I think a lot of people, they've distilled it down to, is the body sitting on the chassis? Mm-hmm. But really it's a matter of, is the body supported on the outsides instead of in the center? And that's a big thing too. So when you're looking through cars, what are you looking for?
The first thing that I do is I'm always just reading the rules, right? Because you could have a car that is a complete, pig, and then for a given rule set, it has something special, right? It has some unique attribute that makes it sort of a weapon in that rule set. So like, let's take Slot It Nationals 2022. We all ran the Jaguar, and that was a new car. It was long, it was wide, it was low, the body wasn't super heavy, and the body was also on top of the chassis. So, most critically, it allowed us to run the F1 tires. And so because there was no maximum tire width, it was one of the only cars where we could actually run those tires. So it was just the de facto car that we all ran because of that one loophole. The next year, those cars had to run the spats. And so the tires couldn't be that wide. And we also couldn't run F1 tires. So the cars got narrower. And so that kind of killed the advantage there. And we found that the weight on the Nissan was really advantageous, that the body was super lightweight, made the car handle great. And then last year, to your point, we had to add weight to the cars to meet a minimum body weight. I think it was either 16 or 18. I can't really remember.
It was 18.
Okay. And so it kind of neutered the Nissan a bit. And some of the things that were great about the Nissan, it pulled it back. And so really my take is I'm always just reading the rules and I'm thinking critically about where are the gaps in the rules? What are the things that I feel like I can kind of lean into to find the best car? And that often tells me what car I'm going to like. I will say that as a general rule, I have been starting to really like short wheelbase cars. So I know that you and I have talked about long guide to rear axle, but some of the most fun cars and the best cars I've driven are actually short. So I think there's like a middle ground there where the shorter cars rotate around the corner a bit more efficiently. They're not kind of You really don't have to like move this whole big car around the corner and rotate. It takes longer. So I think there's a balance. Really comes down to the rules, and then also comes down to the track, I think. And it's inevitable, right? I mean, like, it's inevitable. There's always a car at a track that is like the hot car.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting you talk about cars that end up just like being great in a specific situation. I mean, look at the NSR Classics race at Motown, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We've run Can-Am at Electric Dreams for a long time, and people have tried the P68, and it's just never been a car, it's never been one that's really stood out as like, oh, that's a great car on that track. At Motown, it was perfect. And in that instance, I think that car has got a little more weight behind the rear axle. Motown is definitely a higher grip track because it's a spray glued track. It's a track that has 24 steel run on it and has, a lot of residual spray glue. And when you've got high grip like that, and think, the Jaguar, right, with F1 tires, the longer cars can they've got a lot more momentum on the rear, and they can break those tires loose and not suffer some of the problems when a car gets really locked up from really high grip. So it's really just, there are track conditions that can dictate some of that, but ultimately it comes down to using those things and what you think about them to come up with maybe 2 or 3 cars that you think might be good, and then testing them on the track. It's not like we sat in 2023 and said like, oh, the Nissan's going to be the car, and didn't build anything else, right? Like, we had other cars that we built and tried, and the Nissan came out ahead. And that was really from a narrowed down group of cars that, I think I tested maybe 3 that year. And you brought 2, because I think you brought a 962 or 956, one of the 2.
Yep.
And it's just how does it end up coming out on the track? And I think you probably could have raced the 962 that year if that was the only car you had brought. Maybe it wouldn't have been as good, but you can start to gain some experience with that and figuring out what geometries and what things work well on a particular track that you're racing, and start translating that from class to class, because I think that really is something that tends to work across multiple classes and different car types, and just figuring out, all right, what's our situation here? What particular needs does this track have, or this class with this rule set? And then figuring out what you're looking for.
Yep, I agree. It is interesting. And I think that some people can conflate the whole magic car thing with this, right? Because I feel like some people might interpret how good a car is as it being a magic car, but maybe there's something advantageous to it that suits the track that they're driving on. So like you were saying, the P68 was so good at Motown, I don't even know how it would be at Electric Dreams or at, Mike Andrews' house or any of the local circuits that we race at. It's just not a car we even really think about. But that doesn't mean that it's a magic car, right? It just means that it has something that works particularly well in that instance.
Yeah. And I think, the thing to do there is to, when you find that situation, look at the car critically and ask yourself, why? Why do I think this is working in this particular scenario? Because I think for me and for you, when we talk through these things, that helps to kind of bring out some ideas of what might be making something better somewhere than at another track. And that's just more information kind of in your back pocket that you can use the next time you're trying to set up a new car for a new class and choosing a car. All that information is helpful. And the more you race, the more you do it, the more times you go through that, I think that just starts to become something when you kind of see it on the page and you think, oh, that might be something. And you might be wrong sometimes, but that's why the track always determines what gets raced. But you can get kind of a fair amount of the way there just looking at the cars and seeing kind of the numbers.
Yep, totally. Well, I think that's basically it for today's episode. The next episode, we are going to be talking about why tuning your cars for consistency and not speed, not outright speed, is something that we actually implement on our own program and why we think it's beneficial. And then we also have a question from F1 Fletch, who says, do you flatten each chassis and or pod assembled or separately? And do you find that you have to do that to every chassis? Do we want to touch a little bit on upcoming events? Because there are a couple events coming up in the next couple months, notably the stuff here and the stuff there. Do you want to touch on that?
Sure. So we've got in Motown or in Modesto, we've got the MR Slot Car Challenge, right, coming up
Yep.
in just a few weeks, and then right the next month we've got the second leg of that down in El Segundo at Electric Dreams. So we'll be racing that. In between there, I'm taking a trip to Italy to race the NSR WRE, which will be a really fun and interesting event. I'm actually setting up cars for that right now. We've got GT at Electric Dreams, the rescheduled GT race at Electric Dreams. And I believe we also have LMP Open at Electric Dreams as well. So a lot of racing coming up, in May and June. And hopefully some of you that are local out here, we can see you out at the races.
Yep, and you're also forgetting the Slotted Nationals, the 4th year running of the Slotted Nationals. We're getting to about I think we're at roughly like the 4-month mark right now. So if you're planning on being there, you guys should start booking your hotels, getting your flights, and start getting plans in line to get there. It will be the biggest slot car race in the United States for 1/32 scale, guaranteed. Not really.
Yep.
Don't. I'm not liable. Anyways, hopefully the next episode we'll get back to Todd making fun of my jacket, and we will have some more laughs and some great topics. Can't thank you guys enough for joining, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, guys. That
All
was
right.
money. Good job.
6 takes. I'm gonna make it work. Okay. Today we have our question, which shall remain question nameless.
Okay. Question nameless. Well, does it work on it? A little bit. Todd's 4.5 minute tech tip.
That's the cold open right there.